In 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog burst onto the Sega Mega Drive and straight into my life. My mum was the gamer of the household, I was only 2 years old at the time, but that spiky blue blur made me pick up a controller for what I'm reliably told was the first time. I fondly played his games, watched his TV shows, and even the first comic series I ever read was Sonic the Comic. Almost 27 years later, Sonic's still a huge part of my life. I booked a day off work for Sonic Mania's release and treated it almost like a religious holiday. My strongest memories are of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but I've owned the original, the place where it all started, for as long as I can remember, and have beaten it more times than I care to count. Across the years, I've bought the game over 10 times, spanning multiple platforms, ports, and anthologies. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm probably quite biased towards Sonic, but I really wanted to do a series around these games, explore them in depth, and try to figure out what continues to draw me to them, warts and all. I'm talking themes, aesthetics, level layouts, my personal history with the game, the many ports and re-releases, the whole 9 yards. This video could well end up being longer than my average completion time for the game itself. I think we all know the story by now. Dr. Robotnik is turning woodland creatures into robots, and it's up to Sonic the Hedgehog to stop his crimes. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, only if you're reading the English manual. The Japanese booklet actually gives us a lot more detail. As I can't read Japanese, sorry, I'm relying on Sonic Retro's translation, but it explains the game takes place on the mysterious South Island, which doesn't have a fixed position and instead drifts through the sea. Meaning it's perfectly possible to find South Island in the north? That can't be right. At any rate, it's said this drifting is caused by the Chaos Emeralds that reside there. Dr. Robotnik, aka Eggman, wants to find and harness the Chaos Emeralds to power his machines and sets up a base on the island, installing defences to keep Sonic the Hedgehog out of his way. We're even told that Sonic and Robotnik have met and fought each other before, meaning the first game isn't their first battle. Another weird detail from the Japanese manual is that Sonic's not a native of South Island. Instead, he sometimes finds himself on its shores by sheer chance. A hedgehog who can't swim, no sign of the tornado biplane or Tails at this point, and he randomly ends up on an island that's never in the same place twice. I'm just gonna roll with it. As was tradition with classic video games, none of this is told to you in-game, and not all re-releases include digital copies of the manuals, so these details could easily be lost to time. Thankfully, you don't need to know anything about the plot to actually enjoy the game. When I first played the game, I couldn't even read yet. All I knew was smash the bad guy, and that was good enough for me. Speaking of, this is what that first experience looked like to me. This footage is captured from my childhood console and cartridge, and man, was it a trip to go back to this. You might notice the coloured borders all around the screen, the slower speed, and the weird music. This all relates to European television standards. Our televisions used to be 50 Hz. This means the image on screen refreshed 50 times per second. Now, this isn't to be confused with 50 frames per second, and it's not to say that all Power Region video games used to run slower, but in Sonic's case, the game does run about 17% slower in PAL territories. Here's a comparison between the demos on the PAL and NTSC versions of the game. As you can see, that's quite a difference. Another misconception is that the fault lies with the European cartridge, but this has since been debunked. If you put a PAL cartridge into an NTSC or NTSC-J console, the game runs at full speed. The issue actually lies in the PAL Mega Drive hardware itself, specifically the Mega Drive's VDU chip. Games needed to be optimized for PAL consoles, and Sonic, well, wasn't. Meanwhile, the reason for the borders is that while NTSC televisions had a vertical resolution of 480 lines, PAL televisions had a vertical resolution of 576 lines. While this benefited in higher resolutions for some 3D games in PAL territories during later console generations, during the Mega Drive era, the extra space was just filled with a solid colour. PAL did benefit from better colour consistency, with many consoles natively supporting RGB SCART cables without the need for modding, so there's often a debate around which was better. If you want more detail, I'd highly recommend watching this video by the Nostalgia Nerd. After you've finished watching mine, of course. Technical reasons aside, the end result is that the fastest thing alive was much slower here in Europe. You had more time to react, making the game a little easier, but having gotten used to the 60Hz version in recent years, the acceleration and top speed simply don't feel right going back now. Sonic feels heavy, clunky, and it's a chore to get him moving. Obviously, back in the day, we didn't know any better, but once you've experienced the game at full speed, it's very difficult to go back to this, even if I eventually readjusted to it. There are also multiple releases of Sonic 1 on the Mega Drive, which vary slightly. Sonic Retro have compiled a list of changes between what's known as Rev 00 and Rev 01. Generally, Rev 01 is considered to be better, adding scrolling clouds in Green Hill, line-scrolling effects in Labyrinth Zone, fixing the level select order, more on that later, and giving the player an extra life for every 50,000 points earned. Generally, all Japanese cartridges should contain Rev 01 as the game released later there. Only the first run of American and European cartridges contain Rev 00, with later reprints being Rev 01. Rev 01 still contains some bugs, including the jump glitch. Sometimes when Sonic jumps, instead of turning into a ball, he enters his walking animation in mid-air. I can consistently do this in Marble Zone. While it's kind of funny to look at, it can be disastrous if it occurs when leaping at an enemy, because you'll take damage instead of killing your foe. Spikes also behave differently here than in later games. When Sonic gets hit, he has a few frames of invincibility, however Spikes ignore this. Meaning if you get knocked back onto Spikes, you'll still die despite your invincibility frames. It's debated as to whether this is a glitch or not, because the code supposedly makes it seem as if this is intentional behaviour. It's a feature, not a bug. Phew! That was a lot of info to go through. Let's move on to the Sega Saturn version of the game, which was included in the Sonic Jam compilation. One of the first things to note about this release is the difficulty selection. Easy actually cuts the game down considerably, asking you to only complete a single act of each zone and skipping most boss fights. Yeah, let's go straight from Marble Zone Act 1 to Springyard Zone Act 2. Why not? The bizarre level order is Green Hill Zone Act 1, Marble Zone Act 1, Springyard Zone Act 2, Labyrinth Zone Act 3, Starlight Zone Act 2, Scrap Brain Zone Act 1, and then Final Zone. Because of this, it's only possible to get a maximum of 4 out of 6 Chaos Emeralds in easy mode. However, you benefit from disabled traps, extra rings, including some in the final boss fight, and additional platforms and springs. Just take a look at the infamous climb from Labyrinth Zone Act 3 as a shining example. In addition to this, some of the crushing pillars in Marble Zone are frozen in place, the final boss only fires 1 piston at a time rather than 2, and bosses die in just 3 hits. Not going to lie, I'm pretty sure the first time I beat Sonic 1, it was playing the Saturn version on easy. There's also normal mode, which gives you every single level, but still makes things a little easier with extra rings, platforms, and fewer traps and enemies. I actually really like this difficulty level. It takes the edge and frustration off levels like Scrap Brain Zone, and overall makes the title more enjoyable. Yeah, get good. Let me enjoy my game how I want to. Finally, there's Original, which is identical to the Mega Drive version, for those of you who want that. This is all possible because the game isn't being emulated. It's a port, meaning they remade it for the Saturn. There are some oddities and missed opportunities. For example, the jump glitch is still present and accounted for, and instead of CD quality audio, we get the original tracks but seemingly on fewer channels. On the plus side, the music now plays back at the proper speed, even though the gameplay itself is still 17% slower in the European release. On the positive side, the spike bug is fixed, plus this version of the game has an option for the spin dash. Originally, this move wasn't included until Sonic 2, meaning this game wasn't designed around it, and it has limited utility here. It can be very useful in places, but can also lead to some weird glitches and, if you're not careful, some funny deaths. Outside of that, this version also benefits from a time attack mode and an option to play the special stages back to back. This is among the most fully featured re-releases of Sonic the Hedgehog, and remains one of my favourite ways to revisit the title. Sadly, it seems not a lot of people have access to, or experience with, this version of the game. Possibly because the Saturn didn't sell very well, but I implore you to try it out if you can. While the Sega Saturn version of the game was extremely impressive, the PlayStation 2 compilation, Sonic Mega Collection Plus, was anything but. From the Dreamcast onwards, many European games started offering a 50 and 60 Hz mode. Sadly, the PS2's Sonic Mega Collection Plus doesn't have this feature, instead offering a bare-bones emulation of the 17% slower Sonic the Hedgehog. You'll also notice that, while the menus and such are full screen, the game itself still has a border on all sides. Even the music is back to being slower, despite this having been fixed in Sonic Jam's port. This release is wholly unremarkable, lazy, and disappointing. Sega completely missed a prime opportunity to introduce European gamers to Sonic as he was meant to be played. As it stands, this compilation comes across as a cheap cash grab rather than a true celebration of the Hedgehog's history. There's honestly no reason to buy this collection, at least not the European release of it. The only nice thing I can say is that the PlayStation 2's D-pad suits Sonic incredibly well, but that's rendered moot by our next entry. There are 3 ways to play Sonic the Hedgehog on the PlayStation 3. You have the standalone digital download from Backbone Entertainment, the compilation disc Sega Mega Drive Ultimate Collection, and it's unlockable within Sonic Generations. It's also worth noting that all 3 of these releases are available on the Xbox 360 as well. All of these releases use emulation, but the main draw for European gamers is that Sonic the Hedgehog can finally be played at full speed on unmodded home consoles and without resorting to imports. This was mind-blowing at the time! I admittedly fumbled through and even game overed the first time playing these releases because my muscle memory was set for the 50 Hz speed. It was an absolute revelation, and I was essentially playing it for the first time again. I don't expect American viewers to understand. You always had the proper speed, but to put it into context, the original game came out here in 1991. The Backbone release didn't arrive until 2011. We had 20 years of a slower Sonic we'd largely accepted due to blissful ignorance. I even knew people at the time who honestly believed Backbone had botched it because it was, and I quote, too fast. It wasn't just the speed that revitalized and transformed Sonic 1. With the PS3 offering HDMI out, the game had never looked or sounded better. The Backbone release has trophy and achievement support, and you better believe I maxed it out on both consoles. Sadly, the title screen plays in a docked state during the main menu, with new games booting straight to Green Hill Zone Act 1, giving you no opportunity to input cheats to access the ever-entertaining debug mode. You also had a few filters, screen sizes, and borders to play with to customize your experience, as well as free save slots. And these features are largely the same on the Sega Mega Drive Ultimate Collection, which was also handled by Backbone. The main difference here is that the Mega Drive Collection doesn't skip to the title screen, meaning you can use that debug code. In fact, if you're not too fussed about trophies and achievements, or you want a physical copy, get the Mega Drive Ultimate Collection. As well as Sonic the Hedgehog, the disc contains another 48 games, so you get more than your money's worth. As for Sonic Generations, you can unlock Sonic 1 using in-game points from the same store you buy abilities and upgrades from. You can also get infinite lives from the store if you want to completely remove any sense of challenge from the 16-bit title. I actually really like this version's border, reminiscent of the Japanese box art and seemingly chunkier, sharper, unfiltered pixels. Having played both, I would recommend the PlayStation 3 versions over the Xbox 360 versions for one simple reason: that D-pad. Seriously, these games weren't made with analog sticks in mind, and the directional pad on the Xbox 360 controller is utter garbage compared to the PS3's, which in my opinion is sheer perfection. Now over to Steam, and the Mega Drive Collection is presented very nicely here in the form of a kid's room from the 90s. You even pull games off the shelf to select them. Sadly, the box and cartridge art are inaccurate, but the effort's still appreciated. You also have a variety of filters, including scanlines and TV projection, that can be used to replicate the feel of playing on an old CRT TV in your bedroom. These features can, of course, be turned off if you want a sharp, pixel-perfect presentation. You are essentially just playing a ROM on an official emulator with this release, but Sega have included mod support, essentially allowing you to play ROM hacks from the Steam Workshop. There are far too many to count, but maybe Sonic ROM hacks could be a fun discussion for another time. While making this video, a PlayStation 4 Mega Drive Collection was announced. In fact, by the time I'm done editing this behemoth of a video, it'll probably be out. Most reports are saying it's essentially the same as the Steam release. I'll no doubt pick it up, but I can't cover it right now as I simply don't have it yet. Of course, there are plenty of handheld ports too, with the most infamous being Sonic Genesis for the Game Boy Advance. Okay, real talk, going into this I figured YouTubers might have overstated the issues with this game for the sake of entertainment. Gotta get those views after all, right? After playing it, however, I can sadly confirm that everything you've heard is absolutely true. Let's count off the issues, shall we? An inconsistent, juddering frame rate that not only messes with your inputs and timing, but will even actually make you feel physically ill while playing it, to the point I feel kind of bad for even having the footage on screen for you right now. A cropped screen, meaning you can't see what's coming in time to react to it, even if you know the levels inside and out. I get it, the GBA has a smaller screen resolution than the Mega Drive, but you could have panned the camera ahead of Sonic or redrawn the sprites to accommodate for this. The single worst renditions of these classic tunes to ever curse mankind's ears, and a host of other glitches and oversights. Possibly the single saving grace is that the game has a save feature, so when you inevitably game over from bullshit that wasn't your fault, you can pick up from where you left off and continue torturing yourself. Yeah, it's fucking garbage, don't buy it. Not even for the lols. I also own the DS and PSP releases. There's not much to say about these. They're decent emulations that get the job done on the go, but ultimately they're rendered obsolete by our next entry. You speak to most people and they'll tell you that Christian Whitehead's Android release is the definitive way to play Sonic the Hedgehog, and having played it, there's certainly a hell of a lot going for it. First of all, the game gets a proper 16:9 presentation. This allows you to see far more of what's up ahead to better react to obstacles and enemies. There's a save feature, so you can play in short bursts and pick up where you left off, perfect for a mobile port. After beating the game, you get a level select, so you can replay any stage. This also allows you to go back and retry Chaos Emeralds, something we'll come back to. You can also unlock Knuckles and Tails as playable characters, and they retain their unique movesets. You can also turn on the spin dash for Sonic. As with the Saturn version, these levels weren't built with those abilities in mind, however, so they're kind of redundant here, but it's still fun to have them regardless. The game was rebuilt from the ground up, meaning it's not a one-to-one recreation of the original game's physics, but I'd argue this version feels better to play than the original in that regard. Sonic responds and behaves precisely how you'd want him to. Now for my personal complaints, some of which are admittedly down to my personal preferences. The main one is control. I hate touch controls with a passion. My thumbs block part of the screen while using them, my inputs aren't precise because I'm lacking that all-important tactile feedback that you can only really get from physical buttons, and it causes the game to be frustrating to play for me as I ended up missing jumps I always nail on console. And this was the case on both my phone and my tablet. Admittedly, there are controllers out there for Android devices, and even some Android tablets that have gaming buttons built into them, so if I really wanted to, I have the choice of investing in those. The second issue is that it's on a mobile screen. I much prefer games on a TV than on a portable device, to the point that despite owning both Ocarina of Time 3D and Persona 4 Golden, handheld re-releases that are objectively better than their console counterparts, I still play the console versions far more frequently. There are ways to get this to display on a TV, there are Android boxes out there, screen mirroring is a thing, but I'll never understand why this game didn't get a console release like Whitehead's port of Sonic CD did. Although it admittedly could be because the then current console, the PS3, already had 3 versions of Sonic 1 on it. In terms of the special stages, I felt the arena was spinning faster than it normally would, and that Sonic was heavier than normal, making it harder to move him around it. Now, this is something I only picked up on after playing literally 10 or more versions of Sonic 1 back to back, yet it was kind of off-putting all the same. There are also some small changes to the boss fights, some of which I like, others I don't. The first boss can no longer be hit when he's entering the screen, which really just makes an unexciting encounter drag out longer. That said, putting up barriers in the Spring Yard fight to keep the arena the same size is a nice touch. Overall, I personally prefer to play Sonic 1 on PlayStation 3. It's convenient, it's on a big screen, the PS3's D-pad is perfect for the game, and there are 3 different ways to get hold of it on that platform. Admittedly, if the Android version got a console release, it would instantly overtake the PS3 release in my eyes, and for most people, the Android version is going to be the definitive way to play. I fully recognise it's just my own personal preferences that prevent me from enjoying it to its fullest. Now you know which versions to track down and which to avoid, let's investigate what you're actually playing here. The game's split into 6 zones: Green Hill, Marble, Spring Yard, Labyrinth, Starlight, and Scrap Brain. Technically there's a 7th zone called Final Zone, but I just see it as an extension of Scrap Brain. Each zone has 3 acts, with Act 3 ending in a boss fight between you and Dr. Robotnik. The exception again being Scrap Brain, where Act 3 doesn't feature a boss but does lead directly into the 1-act final zone. Green Hill opens the game with lush green grass, vibrant colours, and a hell of a lot of opportunities to get some insane speed built up. Act 1's job is to teach the player how the game works, while also explaining Sonic's unique selling points. The level starts with a straight sprint that involves minimal obstacles. Sure, you immediately face a motorbug enemy that will kill you unless you find the jump button, but the chances are you'll hit Sonic's top speed within seconds of starting the game. The slopes along this path serve to illustrate that Sonic has unique physics and collision detection that you simply won't find in any other platformer. The lip at the end of this first run, though, will quickly bring you to a halt unless you jump over it. Teaching one of the main lessons of this game, obtaining and maintaining speed. That rush of going full throttle needs to be earned through skillful play. I actually think the moderation of areas where Sonic can go full speed is one of the key strengths of the first game. The title very much holds that joy back, asking you to really keep your eyes peeled and react quickly in order to get the euphoria of running flat out. It makes the gameplay mechanic its own reward. It feels good to go fast, and players will practice in order to be able to do it more often. Back to the opening level, and there's not only a basic jumping tutorial with some steps and a larger gap, but also the introduction of multiple paths, another key concept of the game. Once again, skillful play rewards you with a better route and a faster completion time. Essentially, the game largely works on a principle of moving up is good, moving down is bad. Just look at the number of spikes on the bottom path if you should fall. Still, it's not long before the paths converge, and looking at it as a whole, the first stage is surprisingly linear. Even so, note the amount of choice the player is presented with, the rewards for skillful play, and even the number of opportunities for course correction and trying again if they fall. Act 2, meanwhile, forgoes a top route in favour of advertising exploration. If you look at the map this time, you'll notice there are essentially 3 areas. You have an open area, a funnel in the form of a mandatory platforming challenge, and then another open area. This time, the only way to get to the bottom route is to purposefully go left instead of right. So why would a player choose to do that? Going left certainly takes a lot longer, you'll never see a speedrunner do it, but it also provides more opportunities to collect rings to enter the special stage, satisfying completionists, as well as more enemies to increase your score, complementing players who want to post to scoreboards. This is another thing Sonic 1 does incredibly well, catering to multiple playstyles and different types of gamer. It's one of the reasons the game has such a mass appeal. When I play a classic Sonic game with a friend, we often find our preferred habitual routes are entirely different because we prioritize different goals to each other. You can define your experience, and even now there are very few games that pull this off as well as Sonic does. We'll save Act 3 for when I discuss boss fights. For now, let's move on to Marble Zone. Most people will tell you Marble Zone is a frustrating, slow, overly linear difficulty spike of a pace breaker. They'll also present this image of the level select screen as evidence it was never intended to be the second level. They're certainly not wrong about the linearity, just take a look at the level map. There's one route with only a handful of opportunities to find some extra items. In stark contrast to Green Hill, every player's journey through Marble Zone is going to be more or less the same. As for slow, yeah, there's a lot of waiting around, whether it's for blocks to get across lava, platforms to reach higher areas, or slow crushing pillars. Marble's obstacles will force you to stop every few paces. But when it comes to calling it a brutal pace breaker that was never meant to be the second level, I happen to disagree. I see this linearity, this forced set of preset challenges, and the sheer amount of jumping that's involved, and I see an extension of the opening tutorial. Marble teaches you a different set of skills, emphasizing the game's not about going fast all the time. You will have some strict platforming to complete as well, and you'll have to use the environment to your advantage. The challenges are fair, and the punishments aren't that bad either. I hear complaints about one of the last sections in Act 3 where the game asks you to jump across small platforms that drop from the ceiling. You're not doing this over a bottomless pit, you're doing this over some platforms you jumped over earlier in the same level. In the worst case scenario, you fall and have to replay a short section to try again. There's also a big clue this was always meant to be level 2 in the artwork itself. The grass is identical to that of Green Hill, implying one area would naturally flow into the next. Ultimately, by the time you finish Marble Zone, you've had a chance to go fast in Green Hill, and also had a test of your jumping abilities in the purple temple, dungeon, prison. I'm not entirely sure what Marble's supposed to be, actually. From here on out, the game will be asking you to combine those skills. We can evidence that in Spring Yard Zone. We have a combination of multiple routes, opportunities to go at top speed for extended periods as a reward for skillful play, and we also have several platforming challenges, along with sections that make you stop and wait a la Marble Zone. If you try and rush this zone, you'll be punished time and time again. It's the kind of level that will frustrate you the first time around, but become a firm favourite once you start mastering the mechanics. This is the game telling you that practice time is over. The test starts now. It also throws in some unique gimmicks of its own, most notably the bumpers strewn everywhere, where you'll be forced to figure out the game's mechanics and land on them in precise ways to be able to move on. You also have the first half pipes that arguably allow you to reach the fastest speeds in the entire game by manipulating the way momentum works. Everything in this stage screams that it expects you to know the rules by now. If you thought the internet hated Marble Zone, just wait until you hear their complaints about Labyrinth Zone. I'm going to put this out there. I like the Labyrinth Zone. It's my second favourite stage in the game, and I find it oddly relaxing. Let's get the first complaint out of the way. The water. Everyone says it makes the game far too slow. Bitch, please. Play the game at 50Hz, or worse still, play this level in the GBA port, and then try and tell me the movement speed is too slow. Even then, underwater Sonic doesn't move any slower than Mario's walking speed, and the moon-like jumps give you a greater degree of mid-air control. Sonic's main weapon is his speed, and this level robs you of that. You're going to have to rely on your platforming again like you did in Marble Zone. Only this time, there's also a time limit. Sonic can't breathe underwater. This mechanic is designed to make you do one thing: rush a level that demands to be tackled patiently. You see the 5-second timer, you hear the music, you panic, and you leap headfirst into a ball and chain. Personally, I think it's a brilliant way of screwing with the player. Once you breathe and calm down, there's actually nothing that frightening about Labyrinth. I thoroughly enjoy the underwater platforming climb that echoes back to Marble Act 3. It's taking that challenge and adding the extra caveat of the drowning timer. Even the dreaded boss battle climb is nowhere near as tricky as people like to make it out to be. You just have to break the level down and tackle it one piece at a time. Can I also just say that this level looks absolutely gorgeous, by the way? One of the most eye-catching stages in Sonic the Hedgehog history. The colours work so well together that the stage just pops right out of the screen. Sadly, we go straight from my second favourite level to my least favourite level. I always forget Starlight is in this game, and I'm always disappointed when I reach it. I'd go as far as to say it's an emptier, easier, less visually appealing Spring Yard zone, like Diet Spring Yard, Spring Yard Zero, or Spring Yard Light. Okay, I've run that joke into the ground now. You've got long areas of running uninterrupted, followed by cheap and spammy enemy and hazard placements on moving steps of all things. Oh, and those fans can go straight to hell. The whole thing feels utterly uninspired, and I'm just glad Act 2 is as short as it is. This stage also introduces a seesaw gimmick. There's a ball on one end, you jump on the other, and I'm sure you can figure the rest out on your own. There's also the introduction of a bomb enemy. Now this explodes when you get too close to it, you take damage if you try to attack it, and it's usually placed side by side with 5 other bomb enemies, meaning all you can do is stand in a designated safe area and wait for it to blow itself up before moving on. Boring! The final level of the game is Robotnik's Turf. The area is completely mechanical, and a sign of what the villain will do to the whole planet if you don't stop him. Here, the only way to survive is to perform platforming tasks while maintaining your speed at the same time. This is evident from the floors that drop out from under you, the Mega Man-inspired appearing and disappearing platforms, and far too many bottomless pits. There's not a single skill that Scrap Brain doesn't test. It's tough, it's a gauntlet, and, to be honest, I wouldn't have it any other way for a final level. Likelihood is you're not going to beat this on your first try. Heck, I've beaten the game more times than I can count, and I still screw up here from time to time. Chances are, you'll get a game over here and have to restart the game, but that's also what makes it feel so good when you finally beat it. You get a true sense of accomplishment, which I feel has been lost in some modern games. The third act of Scrap Brain bucks the trend by essentially putting you back in Labyrinth Zone and not featuring a boss fight. Naturally, the people who complain about Labyrinth Zone like to moan about this third act too, but let me show you something. Now, I would talk about Final Zone here, but it's essentially just Scrap Brain's boss fight, and we've yet to discuss any of the bosses in any real detail. On the one hand, I love the idea of fighting Robotnik at the end of each zone. It helps cement the Doctor as the bad guy, helping you as the player form a personal dislike for him, which develops into an increased desire to beat him once and for all. On the other hand, the fights kind of suck. Most of them have a really simple pattern, so you just repeat a handful of actions ad nauseum until you finally land that 8th hit. I won't deny that there are some clever ideas, such as destroying the tiles you're standing on in Spring Yard, but the execution often fails due to a lack of threat escalation. See, in Spring Yard, the longer the fight lasts, the fewer footholds you have above a bottomless instant death pit. You want to finish that fight quickly, and it naturally gets harder as it goes along. But this is also the only boss fight that has this element. Green Hill, Marble, Starlight, and even Final Zone have boss battles that are the same from start to finish. Robotnik's speed doesn't increase when he's near death, he doesn't start attacking more aggressively, heck, he doesn't even call in a couple of badniks as reinforcements. This causes the fights to grow stale and outstay their welcome. Especially the Final Zone boss, which is supposed to be the climax of the entire game, yet just turns into a repetitive RNG chore. You might notice I didn't include Labyrinth, and that's because it has a poor excuse pretending to be a boss fight. When I defended it earlier, I defended it as a platforming challenge, not as a battle. You're chasing Robotnik by jumping up a series of platforms and avoiding obstacles while water rushes up from below you. The idea is that you're supposed to hit him whenever you catch up to him, but even speedrunners can't move fast enough for that, and even if you did catch up, the rebound from hitting him would be detrimental as it'd push you back down towards the water you're trying to outrun. Worst of all, you don't actually have to defeat him to win. You just need to reach the top of the platforming section without drowning, at which point Robotnik runs away from you even if you haven't landed a single hit so far. The only time I've ever beaten Robotnik here is playing the Saturn version on easy, as most of the obstacles are gone and you only need to get 3 hits in to win. This could have been improved in so many ways. They could have slowed down the water and made the vertical section infinitely loop until you'd landed 8 hits. They could have had Robotnik attacking you while you climbed, so he was actually, doing something to antagonize you. They could have had Robotnik attach a weapon or something once you got to the top for a proper boss fight, rewarding skilled players by allowing them to shorten or skip the encounter entirely if they'd landed 8 hits during the climb. They could have done literally anything other than just having Robotnik go, "Oh no, Sonic didn't drown, I guess I'd better leave now." While they could have been worse, the boss fights here are competent at best and sleep-inducing at worst. They're certainly not the game's strongest point. Another weakness of the game can be found in the Chaos Emeralds. If you have 50 rings at the end of a stage, you'll be presented with a giant ring to jump into. Doing so will take you to a rotating bonus level where you can try and get a Chaos Emerald. The emeralds are usually found at the end of a maze, encased in a wall of crystals. You have to repeatedly strike these crystals to make them disappear before you can get at the emerald inside. This is assuming, of course, that you aren't booted out of the stage by a goal tile. These are usually found at dead ends of the maze and in the emerald chamber itself. Avoiding them is harder than it sounds because of the various obstacles in your way, such as bumpers and tiles that reverse the maze's rotation, as well as the awful, unresponsive controls for these levels. If you do fail a special stage, and there's a good chance you might, you can retry by qualifying for another big ring in another normal level, but your opportunities are very limited. See, big rings don't spawn in Act 3 of any zone as they end with boss fights, and no big rings spawn in any act of Scrap Brain, even if you somehow manage to reach the end of those while holding 50 rings. This leaves you with just 10 chances to get all 6 emeralds. It's a grueling task for a single playthrough, especially in older releases where you can't save your game. So, what's your reward? The last few seconds of the ending cutscene change a tiny bit. That's it! There's no Super Sonic in this game, no hidden final level, it's just a very minor change to an already uneventful cutscene. Put very bluntly, the Chaos Emeralds simply aren't worth it. Where the game does shine, however, is in its presentation. Sonic has a wonderful sense of style that bleeds 90s design principles and pop culture. Green Hill's trees and the special stage's background objects mimic low-polygon 3D models. The checkboard patterns that were absolutely everywhere at the time can be seen in Green Hill's dirt. Even the checkpoint markers are representative of that era. You'd think relying on visual design tropes of the then-current decade would date the game, yet somehow the Sonic Team artists managed to make it their own, giving the title a distinctive and timeless look. Even Sonic himself takes elements of other animal mascot characters, most notably Mickey Mouse, and makes them his own. It's the subtle difference between copying something versus being inspired by something and putting your own spin on it. Pun fully intended. Each of the stages have a carefully chosen palette. Technically, the Mega Drive couldn't display as many colours on screen at the same time as the Super Nintendo, but to a creative, a limited palette isn't a constraint, it's a challenge. The result of being selective and thoughtful in their approach is a game that looks far more colourful, vibrant, and alive than any of its contemporaries. These stunning visuals are accompanied by memorable melodies you'll be humming long after you turn the game off. Masato Nakamura of the J-pop band Dreams Come True created the soundtrack, with his original demo recordings being included in a Japan-only compilation CD released in 2011. The music is bouncy, fun, energetic, and perfectly matches Sonic's fast speed and vibrant visuals, spurring you on to keep playing and having fun. It's incredibly upbeat, and even Scrap Brain Zone has quite a triumphant track. Instead of going for dark and menacing, Nakamura produced something that sounds very mechanical, like cogs turning in a greater machine, yet is also imbued with a sense of progression. You're not being oppressed by Scrap Brain, you're storming the fortress, taking the fight to your enemy's front door. It matches Sonic's confidence and optimism perfectly, and I couldn't imagine playing the game with any other soundtrack. These positives by far outweigh the negatives to create a true masterpiece that should be experienced by everyone. There are certainly enough ways to play it, and at a cheap enough price point that no one has any excuse for not giving Sonic 1 a try. There are reasons this game helped Sega rapidly increase their market share against their rivals Nintendo. This was a true must-have exclusive that propelled the Mega Drive to heights it certainly would never have reached without the Blue Hedgehog. Sonic's ongoing legacy is interesting, and I'm certain we'll continue to take a look at that, but you can't deny he had one hell of a fantastic starting point. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching until the end of the video. This has taken a very long time to put together, but I think it's been worth it. I just have a couple of shout-outs I'd like to give. First of all, to Some Call Me Johnny, who is my favourite gaming YouTuber, and a constant source of inspiration. Next we have Exo Paradigm Gamer, who's a YouTuber that does a remake or rebreak series, who made a lot of really good arguments about Sonic versus its own Android port. Next we have a pal of mine, Charlie Cade, aka The Gaming Brit Show. Congratulations on reaching 100,000 subscribers, it's very well deserved. And you can't mention Charlie without also mentioning Hyperbit Hero, who's another amazing gaming YouTuber. Finally, we have my very close friends Terry and Richie, who have put up with me for years, and during this video have actually given me some pretty good debates around Sonic, and even changed one or two of my opinions as we've debated things back and forth in our little group chats. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you for watching again, and I'll see you next time.